Welcome to Kev's Travel Stories. Each week I'll be bringing you a story from the weird and wonderful world of travel, a world that can change the way you see life and love and even the way we find meaning. Places that are iconic and sometimes surprising and even terrifying. So sit back and enjoy while we go on a magical mystery tour together. Welcome to Kevin's Travel Story, and this week we have the most extraordinary tale, dilemma, whatever you want to call it. But the subject is, would you eat cooked rat? Well, I had this dilemma only earlier this year. I was on a trip to Vietnam and Laos with my very good friend Diamond, my intrepid traveller. And we were in Luanprabang, which is one of the capitals in Laos, a fantastic place. I've done a separate podcast on it, so please go and listen to that. It describes the market, it describes everything that happens. One of the most beautiful places that I visited. Well, the night before we'd been to the night market, a fantastic night market. I had tasted the best soup I'd ever tasted. More about that on the other podcast. That morning, we decided to take a stroll in the market after meeting some friends, and I was just mesmerized by the place. My eyes were filled with the color of the textures of the fabrics, the different sweets and vegetables and fruits that were on sale. My ears were filled with the bustle of the Lao language and this sprinkle of foreigners as well, French and German, Australian, American. It was just wonderful. My nose was tantalized by the saffron and the lemongrass. Wonderful. And my mouth, I just had some beautifully freshly squeezed Lao orange. Mwah! Then everything went wrong. I caught my eye on something moving on the ground. I stopped. I looked away. I looked again. There were live toads in a bucket, a plastic bucket. There's only one destination they're going to end up in. And next to that was another big plastic basket, open, full of water, and a beautiful big green turtle lying there. Turtle soup, I thought. If that was not bad enough, on my left was teeth, yellow teeth, open bodies split in the middle, on a skewer. I kid you not. Dear listener, rats. Teeth out, cut down the middle, and I have to say my stomach heaved. I was drawn back with a sort of a terrible fascination. Were people actually eating rat? I moved on, looked away, and then I saw another set of rats, bigger, fatter, darker, blacker. Diamond was there, and I said, "Are people going to eat these rats?" He looked at me in the eye and said, "You in Europe eat all sorts." I was put back in my box. And he was right. If you look at the Hindu population, which makes up 15% of the world, that's 1 billion people. If they saw you eating cow, they'd be equally disgusted. If you look at the Muslim population, 1.8 billion, they would be horrified if they see you eating pork. The consumption of rat meat is a delicacy, and it has a long and varied history. And there are lots of cultural reasons for eating rat, which doesn't really appeal to our Western mind. They eat it for health. They eat it for longevity. It's supposed to be a delicacy that can actually increase your immune system. And quite often, it's economic reasons for doing this. People in Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia would be very low down on the wealth scale, and they would have a lot of difficulty finding protein. And rats, my friend, are a protein source. I even found some recipes for rats, which I may put on our accompanying website if you can literally stomach it. But it was this strange animosity that gripped my body and made my spine tingle with, ugh. But why? I did a little bit of digging, and there's a very interesting history to the consumption of rats and our attitude to rats in the Western world. And it all goes back to the Silk Road. What, you may ask, is the Silk Road? It is what Marco Polo discovered. This incredible route from China all the way through the Orient to Venice and European cities. And this opened up trade. It also opened up the Black Death. Yes, the bubonic plague came from the Orient. Its common form was caused by bites infected from fleas from black rats. Now, you've got this incredible disease called plague Bacillus pestis, and this would attack the lymph node underneath your arm, and you would get what's called a boo-boo. It would go black and swell, and finally, I'm sorry to have to share this, but it would erupt pus, and all of this bacteria would pour out. If you were in the vicinity and you breathed it in or you touched it, you would be infected. So this was a plague that swept through Europe like a dose of salt. There's a contemporary account by Gabriel de Mussis, who talks about the great Mongols armies. They went to Crimea and they besieged a place called Kaffa in 1346. And they were carrying the plague. Some of their soldiers died from the plague, and they used to take the bodies and catapult them over the walls into Kaffa among the population. The bodies exploded on landing and spread the disease. Now, this was actually the first example in history that we know of the biological warfare being used. Can you believe it? So people obviously fled Kaffa. They went on boats to Genoa, Sicily, Venice, and also with them went, can you guess? Yes, the black rat, with its fleas that once they landed on you and they bit you, you could be dead in several days. It was a horrible death. It was a very, very quick death, very painful, and 72% of people who got infected died. So this was extraordinary. 2 years later, the black rats arrived in the UK, and from the spring to the summer in London, half the population was dead. So I go back to this memory, and suddenly it jarred with me. Yes, the reason I don't like rats is because I have what's called a folk memory. And what is a folk memory? Well, according to Jung, the great psychologist, it's the collective unconscious. It's made up of centuries of shared pleasure and pain about love and about death in particular. And it's an ancestral experience. And the ancestral experience of me as a European was rats are bad news. Keep away from them. It's deep in my memory. It's unconscious. And this was the first time I ever realized that folk memory had taken a hold of me. So let's just return back to Luanprabang in Laos and this wonderful market. And I had this horror as people sort of selected their lunch from the various rat skewers with the black teeth. Oh, it was quite awful. Finally, I cornered Diamond. We were both a little bit sensitive. He knew I didn't like the rats thing, and he was a bit defensive about it, quite naturally, because it's a cultural difference, that's all it is. I was in Goa just a few months ago, in India, and the cows there wandered down the road, these beautiful animals. They would never think of harming them. But here I am, being revolted at rats. But I finally asked Diamond, I said, Diamond, do you eat rat? He looked me in the eye and he said, yes, I do eat rat. But it is a delicacy, and it's not the sewer rats. We get rats from the countryside, field rats. There's a big trade. It's a bit like getting organic chicken. You'd have to check the provenance of your rat and make sure it came not from a sewer, which could be filled with all of these sort of awful things like salmonella, but from a field, an organic rat. And it's a wonderful delicacy. And he smiled at me and said, it's a bit like chicken. Well, I looked at the rats again. Did I sample it, dear listener? I couldn't bring myself to. The folk memory's too deep. And so I left. But with that feeling of, that's just me as a Westerner. And cooked rat will never pass these lips. If you really enjoyed this episode, please share it with one person and give us a review on Spotify. The wonder of travel needs to be shared, and I'm delighted to share it with you. And please share it with someone else if you've enjoyed this episode of Would You Eat Cooked Rat? And you can make up your mind.